All right, welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but to provide a platform to share their voice and amplify their ideas to a more accessible world. Today, I'm joined by Chris Ahrens. Chris graduated from SUNY Brockport with a Master's of Science in Adaptive Physical Education, now works as an educator in the San Diego Unified School District. He's the host of the Talking Adapted PE podcast, where he's hosted some amazing guests, including a few that we have had on our show as well. He was a member of the U.S. Para 7v7 national team from 2006 to 2016 and competed in the 2012 London Paralympic Games. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
I'm really excited to be here, Brendan. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So would love to dive into a variety of topics, but maybe let's talk about the role that soccer played in your childhood to start. So when were you first introduced to soccer as either a quote unquote traditional sport or as a para sport?
Yeah, I think, and you know what, I think it's broader than that. I think it's the role that sport has played in my life. And obviously soccer became my vehicle to outside of my family, the single thing I'm most proud of representing our country in the Paralympic Games. But I'm the youngest of four kids from a really small town in upstate New York, and my parents, having kids in the 80s, they were very typical. They wanted their kids to be active. I was born, the umbilical cord was actually wrapped around my neck. I was born 3 weeks late, something that would never happen today. I am minimally affected on the left side of my body. It is noticeable mostly in my hand, but people are always surprised to learn that it feels like there's a line going down the middle of my body, all the way down to my toes. I feel it in my mouth even. So that's kind of the background with my disability. And growing up at around age 4, my mom just wanted me to be active. So T-ball, soccer, whatever it might be, trying to do it. She jokes that swimming wasn't going to be my sport because with one side stronger, I just kind of went in a circle. So that was never going to be my thing. We always had a good sense of humor about my disability. You have to laugh sometimes. But my parents and my family, all my siblings were into sports, so it was expected. I still remember my dad coming home when I was maybe 5 years old. This is a core memory for me, and it's not related to soccer, but he came home and my brother, who's 10 years older than me, had gotten a pack of baseball cards, and there was a Jim Abbott card in it. And for the listeners that maybe don't know who Jim Abbott is he was a one-handed baseball player that had a pretty long career in the major leagues. Ultimately, at the end of the day, his win-loss record isn't that incredible, but he threw a no-hitter, and he got there and played for teams like the Yankees and the Angels. And I remember my dad coming home and showing me the card and saying, I'm going to teach you how to play baseball. And we did. And so my dad came up with a glove change mechanism for me, and I played baseball for a long time as well. And then, soccer, I was pretty right-footed, but again, it was a sport that I could access. And I would say that around age 12, 13, the athleticism of my able-bodied peers started to take over, and it did become a little more difficult for me. I actually lived in an area where boys soccer was not very common. Again, in 2024, that's probably strange for your listeners to hear, but we were just a really rural town, and the focus was on football, the American version. And so I jumped into that, and I don't know what my coach was thinking as they put me at center, so we occupied my one strong arm with snapping the ball, but I was always known as a gritty player who definitely, left his heart out on the field and played really hard. So where I'm giving you a really long answer, and just the impact sport had on me it's where I felt like I belonged. I wasn't on the sporting field, even in baseball, I had to do the glove change, but in the older levels, I had kids that would try to steal a base or on a pickoff move to first base. I played first base, and they would think they could get to second, and I would have the glove change down to where I'd throw them out at second. And it always impressed people, right? And they're like, wow, I can't believe you did that. That's really cool. So I wasn't just the kid walking around school with the crooked arm or the slight limp. I was a kid that was okay at stuff. And so eventually baseball caught up with me, and I didn't make the varsity team in my school, and I slid over to tennis, and I did well in tennis, and I earned the high school tennis MVP. I made the playoffs in doubles junior and senior year. So again, this confidence, like I started to identify that like, oh, I can be good at these things. For all the insecurities I felt walking around my school, trying to find my place, all the, no one outwardly, in middle school was a different story, but by high school, no one was outwardly like making me feel bad or anything like that. But again, like I'm not naturally built like the biggest or strongest and things, and these sort of just subtle gestures from society and peers, and you're trying to find your place. Well, on the tennis court or the football field is where I started to feel that. So you're probably wondering where soccer even comes back into it then, because I've hardly talked about it. I played soccer again and then went away from it. And I was at SUNY Brockport sitting in a class with Lauren Lieberman, and she was talking about the Paralympics. And I had a little bit of background on the Paralympics. we had a family friend who competed in the 96 games for swimming. They weren't totally foreign to me. And I decided to just do some research. I was like, I wonder what it would be like if I played like on an even playing field. Like I did okay. I was not a standout by any means, but I did okay in other sports. And so tennis was naturally where I was drawn. I started to look and I saw that there was only wheelchair tennis. Obviously did not meet that designation, but just through clicking around on whatever the internet was like in 2006, I came across what is now called the CP national soccer team, but at the time it was called the Paralympic national soccer team. And I saw that it was for individuals that were either born with cerebral palsy or had survived strokes and traumatic brain injuries. And I just sent them an email and said, "Hey, I used to play." I was really transparent with them. I said, "I used to play. I'm just inquiring. Like, do you have tryouts? Do you have open tryouts? I'd be willing to get back into the sport." And it was as many times as luck needs to play a part in things. They were in a transition phase and looking for players. And they flew me out to San Diego to attend my first training camp, and it just snowballed from there. And so the role, again, back to your original question, the role sports played is that there's no doubt that sports has changed my life. It's what I've used to feel accepted. It was my vehicle to peers and social relationships and those types of things. So there's no doubt that sport and then ultimately soccer, with getting to represent the United States, something a kid dreams of, and I didn't even know that I could. And then I have almost a 10-year career, World Cups, Paralympic Games, soccer Hall of Fame finalists, those types of things that only a kid can truly dream of. And with a disability, you're not sure you're going to have those opportunities. So to get those, I mean, sports just been the single biggest factor in my life.
So that discrepancy between you and your peers ability wise that became evident around 12 or 13, but you didn't pursue para or adaptive sports, whatever label you want to put on it, until university. In that segment of time in between 5 or 6 years, 6 or 7 years, were adaptive sports programs available? Were you resistant to participate in them because you did find that you could participate in quote unquote traditional sports?
Yeah, there was no, so just for a little perspective, I'm from a town of about 2,500 people, a county of less than 100,000. I was, besides, students that really needed their curriculum modified and adapted in school, I was really the only kid walking around with a visible disability. Um, and my parents just raised me how they knew how to raise me, which was like my siblings. So I don't think I would have been closed off to it, especially once I would have, and I've thought about this, and if I'd come across the soccer team earlier, what would that have done for me? Would I have been more driven at a younger age? Would I have, these types of things? I don't think they were prevalent. And then two, my family just didn't seek them out because they were just raising me how they thought to raise me. My family didn't really view me any different. I just had some extra hurdles, but they didn't view me as like, oh, we need to seek out, this another form of sport, so to speak.
Yeah. What role do you think the increased coverage that the Paralympic Games and adaptive sports as a whole plays in the social emotional health of young individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, I'd have to imagine it's huge. And the example I'm going to use, Brendan, is a former teammate of mine who was quite a bit younger than me, and he's just wrapping up his career now. Um, it's probably 8, maybe 10 years younger than me. We crossed paths recently through we're both involved on the governance side of U.S. soccer. And he said to me, he's like, "Hey, I don't think I've ever told you this. You were the first person I ever met that looked like me that had like a normal life." And what he meant was that like I was going to college, eventually girlfriend who became a wife, kids. And so that stuck with me since he shared that. And I don't think in the moment I knew that, or I definitely didn't know that. And I just can't think that if you take that one example and you multiply it by all of these kids, like my 12-year-old me, if I was tuning into the Paralympics, um, what could that have done? Oh, there's people that look like me that are doing things at an amazing level, at an elite level. I can be great at something. I don't have to look like Dwayne The Rock Johnson or whatever it might be, or I don't have to, um, I may not make it to the NFL, but like there's a pathway for me. And I just can't help but think that that can change lives for kids to grow up knowing that they can achieve greatness. I mean, what a different thing. And it's not that I wasn't told I couldn't achieve greatness by any means, but societally it was certainly implied, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I hope companies recognize, I guess, the value in adaptive athletes in I guess even how they can market them and how they can portray adaptive sports in a more positive light and a more, I guess, prolific or serious frame than sometimes disabled sports or adaptive sports is viewed, and presenting it as different, not less, I suppose.
Yeah, like I'm not exceptional because I wake up every day and say I have cerebral palsy. I'm going to go to my job, yay me, right? Like there's no other, there's that is the expectation. I am a part of society. That should be the expectation. What if people want to admire my story for something? I'd much prefer they admire the fact that I chased a dream and I did it through hard work and grit. And I had a lot of people tell me along the way, like, you're crazy. You're doing what? Like you're trying to play for a national soccer team, right? So I just happen to have cerebral palsy, but my story is the same as other people that have competed in the able-bodied Olympics or a professional sport or a Division 1 sport or a Division 3 sport for that matter. Whatever their story is, I'm not exceptional because I have cerebral palsy. I just happen to have it, and I would hope if that to a young kid with cerebral palsy, I can understand that. But to your point about the marketers and how they frame stories, um, it's like a person with a disability has no other option. They don't, so it's not like, oh, they're so brave, they overcame. Like, there's no other choice. They're just doing the same thing that Usain Bolt's doing, though. They're just doing it with on an equitable playing field. So
Yeah.
praise them for their greatness.
What do you want? You mentioned that you have a 2 and a 5-year old. What do you want them to understand about disability?
I mean, that's a deep question, right? That's a deep question. Well, I can't do their hair. They're both girls. I can't do their hair, so a lot falls on their mom. Um, so no. When I go to pick them up, my left hand maybe accidentally pinches them. So no, I just look. I think they're exposed to it from birth, and so I hope through that combined with the education we provide in the house, they grow up as open-minded, accepting people, and excuse me, and when they are in the world, that's just whoever. Let's say there's a kid at school that's, oh, that's so and so, but it's they don't even think twice about maybe bringing them into their friend group or anything like that, and they don't even view it. And I know people say that, like, we live in such a time where people say I don't view color, and people roll their eyes, right? Like I get it, but like at the same time though, like my group of friends in high school, we never talked about my disability because I don't think it didn't matter to them, right? And so I guess that's ultimately what I hope for my kids, that they grow up as empathetic and understanding people, especially those towards individuals with disabilities. And it starts at home that, oh, like, this is difficult for my dad. My 5-year-old calls it my goofy hand. So I'm trying to make sure he doesn't say that to a kid in school publicly, as that might make them feel bad. But internally in the house, that's kind of what we, trying to get her to understand. And she's starting to get to the point like, oh, like, mommy does this because that's hard for you, daddy, right? Like, so just little things that, she's being exposed to. And I just hope that they are empathetic, kind, understanding, and inclusive people.
Yeah. Do you think your disability influenced you to pursue your career in adapted PE, or was there some other driving factor?
There was another driving factor, but I know for a fact my disability played a part too. So if you want the backstory, I'm happy to provide it.
I want as many stories as you're willing to share.
All right, great. Yeah, no, of course. And you didn't know what you're getting into. I'm a talker. So yeah. So around age 16, my sister's a physical therapist assistant, and she had gotten a job at a school through a United Cerebral Palsy. And these are individuals with cerebral palsy that certainly are more impacted by their disability than I am, hence needing to go to a UCP school. But she came home one day and was telling me about, yeah, they have phys ed, and that's this thing called adapted phys ed, and it's a PE teacher that specializes in working with them. And so learning about that combined with, and I remember being reflective, like, oh, maybe I'd be really good at that because, like, I have a disability, so maybe I can take on some unique perspective and do it. So the driving force was learning about it, and then being reflective and thinking about it in my own life. And then, when I wanted to do that, my parents were really supportive. And growing up in upstate New York with Cortland and Brockport nearby, my mom was kind of dialed into, my dad was in education, and so she was kind of dialed into schools and who had PE programs, and it's kind of how we went about it. And I mean, I tell people all the time, and they find it hard to believe, I'm in the career I've wanted to be doing since I was 16 years old. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. When did your APE career start?
my career started in 2009. So finished undergrad in '07 at Brockport, jumped full steam into training to try to qualify for the Beijing Paralympic Games. We ultimately didn't, I was training full time. We ultimately didn't qualify for that games. Was in flux got in touch with Dr. Lieberman at SUNY Brockport, who put me in touch with Dr. Winnick. He had an opening on his on a grant that he had for graduate students. Went back to Brockport full time for a calendar year, and then jumped into the field in 2009.
So in the last 15 years, how have you seen the field of APE evolve, or what has changed from a philosophical standpoint?
Yeah, I think a lot, right? So it's funny because I learned about it through a UCP school, and that's like not even a percentage point of the population that I work with. The majority of mine, I mean, the majority of my students have autism, and then the next subset would be probably individuals with intellectual disabilities. And it's not to say that I don't serve individuals with physical disabilities. I of course do, but it is much fewer and further between. Um, where it's changed, and I spend a lot of time reflecting on this because I don't know if we're going the right direction. Is that and integration or inclusion, whichever word you want to assign to it, is everywhere. And I do co-teach and I do support that model. And I support that model because my students at the high school level are going to be going to physical education anyways, because that's how their teacher is prepped. I'm going on a much deeper thing here. So my thing is that, like, well, if they're going to a general physical education teacher, it is only ethical of me to support that process. Like, why would I not be a part of that process? And I step in and I provide a parallel environment. Like today, we're doing soccer actually. Well, I have kids that it would not be safe to include them in a soccer game. I will provide a parallel environment where we're working on soccer skills. Pull over a few gen ed peers that want to help, boom, make it work. And that model is sort of everywhere. I think you see Special Olympics and Unified taking off, and this is and I work through the Unified approach and apply for Unified school status. Um, but I think that that's probably when I first got my job, it was a lot of just small group. Adapted phys ed is separate from physical education. You take your small group, you do your thing. General PE mindset was those kids aren't my kids, those kids are your kids. So I think from a social point of view, there is positives to this sort of integration. Um, but I'm not convinced that we can truly meet the needs of every kid through just saying like we have to teach them through an integrated model. But I
Well, I think
also,
that's how Justin maybe Hegel differentiates between integrated and inclusive, I suppose.
yeah,
Like integrated being the physical presentation of people with and without disabilities, and similarly to you, unified sports was kind of my introduction to inclusion. Like unified basketball was the first time I was ever exposed to disability, and it was truly life changing for me in many ways. But that's kind of how I ran my gym at the beginning. Like I was like, okay, we need sessions where there's people with and without disabilities together. And that was well and good. And I'm sure many of the people felt included. But if I adopt Justin's perspective of inclusion not necessarily being a physical presentation, but a social emotional component, then it requires direct feedback from the participants as to whether they're feeling included. So I don't get to dictate whether it's inclusive, they do. So that's an interesting, I guess, conversation to have because it requires a lot of consistent feedback from the participants.
it does, and it forces you to be reflective because let's be honest, a lot of times at the end of the day, and when I speak to undergrads that I'm asked to do from time to time, or people going through a credential program, I say, hey, be cautious of like I statements like this model makes me feel good or I feel good, right? Okay, but it's actually not about you. How does it, to your point exactly, how do the participants feel, right? Do they feel included or do they just feel like they're in space? They're being told that they have to be here, right? So I think a lot of times in education, we leave feeling like it makes us feel good, like, oh, I'm bringing the kids in, we're doing inclusion, we're doing great stuff, I feel good. People tell me it's good, so I feel good. And you really have to be reflective and say, yeah, but is it good? And
Yeah.
I've taken this lens on lately, Brendan, is like, and I've applied it to politics. I've really tried to apply it to just about anything. And it's like, what if I'm wrong? Right. So when I reflect on things, I try to be like, what if I'm wrong? Like what if I am? Like I'd be curious about research that says kids meet less of their IEP goals in an integrated setting or meet more of them. I don't know the answer, but like
Yeah.
that to me, that's kind of like where we're at. And I just, what if I'm wrong? What if we're all wrong? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I think I adopt a similar at times it feels cynical because I'm always looking at things through a critical lens, and um, I see one type of business model, and I'm in the fitness setting, not the school setting, but I see one sort of fitness model being praised, and I'm like, well, it doesn't do this, or well, it's not giving people with disabilities the option to choose when and with who they want to train with, so it's not truly inclusive because it's not providing options. So I guess it's finding that balance between being critical and also being content with the efforts that I'm putting into things. But I think these conversations that I've had through the podcast have been really insightful for me, just trying to understand as many different perspectives as possible, because you can live in an echo chamber, and I sometimes feel like my LinkedIn feed or certain social circles I'm in become echo chambers, and the same thing gets repeated over and over again. And I have to make a conscious decision to try to learn from different viewpoints. We are grateful for the support of our first show sponsor. Resolution Fitness offers leading brand health club equipment and accessories for residential and commercial use. In addition to traditional exercise equipment, they specialize in adaptive fitness products and wheelchair accessible machines. If you're interested in outfitting your fitness facility or home gym to be more accessible, visit www.resolutionfitness.ca or the link in the show notes below.
Absolutely. And and the other thing we see is Twitter X, whatever it is. It's great. It's a great place to share things, but I'm seeing more and more in education where somebody puts up a cool video of some assistive technology, let's say in a physical education setting, and people go wild for it. It's really cool. It's really creative. That person put a lot of time into it, and I'm certainly not against it. But then to myself, I think, okay, but like, how does this generalize to their life when they're not in school? Is somebody
Yeah.
going to have the switch for them when they're not there, and are they going to be able to do it? And so, yeah, just that, like you said, just, and sometimes when you're critical, people think you're like a curmudgeon, right? Or that you don't
Yeah.
want this thing that's so obviously good. You're like, no, actually, I really want the thing that's really good, but I actually want us to like think about it. Like,
Yeah.
is it good? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you reference kind of like techno ableism, I believe it's referred to as, just like people without disabilities creating technological solutions to solve a problem that people with disabilities don't always want to be solved. Or like we have some clients with spinal cord injury or stroke, and they often use various forms of AT, or they're introduced to various forms of AT, but like you said, they're not really usable or they're not really convenient or efficient. Like an exoskeleton that allows someone with a spinal cord injury to walk seems really cool, but if it requires 3 therapists and 30 minutes to get on just so that person can walk up a flight of stairs where there should have just been a ramp there, um, I don't know if it moves the needle. I think we constantly have to weigh the time cost, the socioeconomic cost of these technologies that we're perpetuating, but it's a tricky balance to find, I suppose. Innovation, but also realistic.
Yeah, it is a balance, right? It is. So,
What are you currently, I guess, working on within your school district to assess the inclusivity of the PE offerings, or I guess kind of what are your main performance like benchmarks to whether you guys are accomplishing what needs to be accomplished?
it's interesting you would ask this. I sit on the PE leader, so I'm one of the adapted phys ed leads for my department. So I oversee 39 other teachers with two other incredibly talented teachers as well, Katrina McClanahan and Laura Brodfear. And so it's the three of us overseeing 36 other teachers, 39 total with the three of us. We also we actually fall in the physical education department, which is really unique nationwide. I'm learning that adapted phys ed falls. And so, and it's been a great relationship. And so we sit at the table with the general physical education resource teacher and then our program manager. And so some of the things I'm starting to try to frame questions is actually your point, like, but hey, like, how do we know it's working, or what are we benchmarking it against? And we're still, I'm just going to be transparent with you. We're still in the really infantile phases of that conversation, right? So maybe a good step would be taking Lieberman Bryan rating scale and just having teachers rate themselves even, right? Um, that sort of thing. I also think too, though, like we have so many strides to make within general physical education in our district that student surveys, can we just start offering student surveys? Was it a meaningful experience for, like, I
Yeah.
know we're on a disability podcast and I'm grateful and appreciative of that, of course, but I just am saying, like, let's just think broadly here because a lot of times things can fall in multiple buckets. And when we think of physical education and inclusion, but I see plenty of gen ed kids that, to Justin's point, it's integrated. I don't think they feel included though,
Yeah.
so maybe we need more student autonomy. Maybe we need these types of things. So I think student survey, student choice, I think those are steps in the right direction. And I think just trying to, but, we have 176 schools. How do you get 176 schools on board, And so, but these are the questions that we're starting to ask at the leadership level and trying to chart out a plan to do this, So can we get a rating scale in an administrator's hand and they go out to their PE class and what does it look like? Okay, well, that's a start.
Yeah.
But then again, I still think you have to come full circle and you have to get that student input. And then I think you can really start to hone in and build programs that benefit both students with and without disabilities.
Yeah, I guess that's the critique maybe of Lawrence scale, right? Is that it doesn't necessarily factor in the emotions felt by the participants. It doesn't factor in any feedback from those users, right? Or those students.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
And, from, I think that scale's, I don't think it's brand new at this point.
Yeah. Yep.
It'll
Yep.
probably be updated. And I think, I mean, at the risk of speaking for Lauren, I'm certainly not. But I would be willing to bet that the lens that she comes at it from is more so about the lens you see presented on paper there. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of why you see what you see.
Well,
But
I
yeah,
think it encourages, and we actually share it in our resources for fitness professionals too, because I think it's a really nice, coherent, concise scale that can easily be implemented for people to be reflective of their environments. I think it does an excellent job with
it's a
that.
great starting point, right? It's a great starting point.
Yeah, yep. And I talked yesterday to Ys and YMCA's, and a lot of them kind of say like, "Oh, we don't have inclusion initiatives yet. We don't have people with disabilities that are training at our facility. So what should we do?" And beyond creating an accessible environment and educating staff and making sure they're empathetic, one thing we talked about was trying to build the infrastructure of getting customer and client feedback. That way, if you're relying on disabled voices to determine whether an environment's inclusive, you might as well start collecting that feedback from people with and without disabilities. I mean, so many disabilities are non-apparent. So while a YMCA might say, "Oh, we don't have people with disabilities because they don't see any wheelchairs in their facility," that doesn't mean they don't have people with disabilities. So just kind of building some of that infrastructure to get student or client feedback, I think, is a good step.
Well, I think I'm actually torn a little bit too, right? Because um, part of me thinks it's important, but part of me thinks that instead of just putting a tent pole that says, "Yay, inclusion for people with disabilities," like you could just naturally make strides. Like you've used the example, I think, a few times of like, could you just have a ramp instead of this wildly expensive exoskeleton, let's say, or something? And like, there's actually people without disabilities that benefit from the ramp, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so that's kind of my point about people with disabilities. So instead of like putting a stake in it, putting a stake in the ground and labeling it and then wanting to celebrate it because you did it, like, oh, yay, look at us, we're including people, as opposed to can you zoom out and can we just flip the model on its head about how we view it for everyone? What benefits everyone? And can you go about it that way? And it certainly does include the voices you're speaking to. I'm not implying it doesn't. I
Yeah.
just am a little bit torn with saying like, oh, we want to increase we want to benchmark to say we have this many disabled members now. And it's like, well, like to your point, it's not always visible, and people may not actually, even if they
Disclose it.
have a
Yeah.
disability, they may not identify as an
Mhm.
individual with a disability. I kind of live with one foot in each world, and so it's like I kind of understand that. So that's just my thing is that I just think it requires thoughtfulness and it requires conversation but I think it's this broader approach is just how are we better people and how do we build better structures.
Yeah. And I can't speak on the state as a whole, but I believe there's not a ton of APE teachers in Massachusetts. I've had schools reach out to me asking if I know anyone that can come in and do an eval for a student because they don't have a designated APE teacher. I've had that conversation 2 or 3 times over the last 5 years. So oftentimes, I guess general PE teachers are required to support students in the school with disabilities. So what can they do, I suppose, to be more prepared if they're not going to get an APE degree? How can general ed teachers more effectively support students with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, what a good question. And I think when I was at SUNY Brockport, I don't know if it's changed, and I think it was just a state requirement. So it's not that Brockport was like doing anything wrong, but I think on the general PE side, you were just required to take one class that
Yeah,
had
I
to do
think
with
that's still
students
the
with
case.
disabilities, right? And
Yep,
I
yep.
think that that's mostly, I think California, or I know for a fact that California is unique that we actually have a credential, and you have to have taken, the subject matter and done it. Um, I think, the general PE teachers have never had more of an opportunity to learn though, just because it's 2024. So I think the idea that they just wouldn't naturally seek out information is difficult for me to wrap my head around
Yeah.
because they have it at their fingertips. And so they could do a few things, just start by looking things up. and finding things to do. You can find stuff, like I said, I already mentioned Twitter, but even beyond Twitter, there's so many. I mean, there are so many. Just a Google search will bring up so many things for you. A YouTube search will bring up videos of activities that are happening and things you can do. The other thing I would say to them, and I feel like so many times I've seen like a person that hasn't been around individuals with disabilities a lot, and it's like they forget how to talk to people. And it's like they're people. Like just talk to them like they're people. Like greet the kids. Tell them you're excited to see them. Tell them you're happy to have them in their class. Tell them all, like that might seem like the lowest hanging fruit, but even that can go such a long way. Like, hey, I am your teacher. I'm happy to be your teacher, and it is, and you can pick up on that through my behavior when I greet you, when I see you, and and just going that far. And then the other thing is that if you're in a state where there aren't adapted phys ed specialists, and this is falling on your lap, and you're not sure what to do, I would encourage you to attack it with energy and not be, even if you're uncomfortable, right? That's how we grow. That's how we get better. Could also make a strong argument that it'll just make you a better teacher overall, anyways. But connect with your IEP team, talk to your occupational therapist, talk to your physical therapist, talk to the classroom teacher. You know, a lot of these classroom teachers will put up videos that involve gross motor and things like that, and maybe they can help you out. So just really take that team approach and try to do it. If you're in a situation where there's other teachers in your district, start a conversation with them. Like, hey, are you supporting the kids at the high school? I have them at the elementary level, but what do you do at the high school so I know what we're getting ready for, or what do we have to do, this type of thing. So I think really what I've just said, a long-winded answer of, is that they have to be willing to learn, and they have to be willing to seek out the resources and have the conversations.
Why does APE need to exist? Like, is there a path where just all PE teachers should learn the principles of APE and how to support students with disabilities? If we're trending towards integrated environments and more immersion and inclusion of people with disabilities in regular school settings, shouldn't just all PE teachers have similar experience and knowledge as APE teachers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would make the teaching community stronger. But at the same point, you know, there are kids on my caseload that their least restrictive environment isn't general physical education,
Yeah.
right? And um, given that what you laid out doesn't exist to my knowledge, that there is strong undergraduate coursework to working with students with disabilities. I mean, that is still where you need an adapted PE specialist. Now, if you were to come to me and say, well, hey, we're wiping the slate clean, and there's this new level of coursework, and they have to take 6 classes in it, 18 credits, or whatever the, you know, a healthy amount, that could be up for debate. What is it? I don't know, but I think you understand the point I'm trying to make. Yeah, I think, like, could it be a blended approach? I mean, I would argue it would only make an individual a stronger teacher. I mean, in
Right.
California, I'm certified in both general physical education and adapted physical education. So, like, I don't know why it can't go both ways, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and
Yeah,
again,
it's a pipe dream. It's not necessarily like I guess it's not necessarily a serious question. It's more of a hypothetical, I guess. Like you said, if you're well versed in adapted PE, or in our case, if you're well versed in adaptive fitness, we talk all the time about how it makes you a better trainer for all populations. So it just
yeah,
seems like it would be a good path forward. But like you said,
I,
it
I
would kind of
agree with
would
that for sure.
require a wholesale restructuring.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's say the Department of Education was able to paint with such a broad stroke that they all of a sudden became passionate about adaptive physical education that they
Yeah.
don't even know exists, by the way. But let's just say they did, and they said, "Hey, we're going to mandate a federal mandate," which I'm not trying to be controversial. I know we just had an election. I know we just had a secret, Secretary of Education candidate announced yesterday. It's not where I'm going, but I'm saying if they did and they said everybody has to have however many credits in PE of working with students with disabilities, yeah, I certainly don't think it's a bad thing. And then would the conversation shift to what is an adapted PE specialist versus just a PE teacher? It would. It just feels like we're really far away from that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, in the fitness space, what could gyms do to become more accessible or inclusive, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, gyms already have to fall into ADA compliances from my limited understanding. That again, that's where I live in both worlds. Like I don't really need a ton of ADA compliance to access my world. And so that's where, you know, I probably fall victim to being a little bit ableist without even realizing it at times, and don't even realize the privilege I have of having a mild disability, or a minimally impacted by my disability. So from my perspective, without the obvious physical environment of being inclusive, is, you know, are they creating and sustaining a culture that people of differently abled movers feel as though it is a culture that they can step into, have enjoyment, want to make healthy life choices, and ultimately feel a part of something. I was saying to you before we actually started recording, I think I've never naturally been a big workout person, and I think about it, and it's like if I'm doing a dumbbell press, like my left side's not as strong, so I have to use different weighted dumbbells on each side, right? Let's say that. And I just always would feel like I'd get people looking at me weird, like, and maybe that's just me being insecure. But my point being is that like, can they create cultures of acceptance and inclusivity? And so, some of these fitness movements we see that people jokingly refer to as cults, and I'm not disparaging them right now, but I'm saying, can those same movements be so broad encompassing that regardless of how you move or access exercise, can you be a part of these movements and feel like you're a part of the tribe, so to speak, or whatnot? And I just think it's really that culture. I think the physical aspect of it kind of goes without saying, right? So to me, there's these underlying things about a lot of what this conversation's been. How does the person feel when they're in the gym? Do they feel like that they're in a safe and accepting place and that they can exercise how they want to? Is their staff prepared to answer questions for the uniqueness, the unique challenges that are presented to that individual when they're working out? Just those types of things I think would be really positive strides.
Yeah, we're of course biased being an education provider of adaptive fitness resources, but at the same time, I think I have the advantage at my facility that we were established with disability in mind. I think it's a little trickier when you take a gym that historically hasn't been serving people with disabilities and try to acclimate. And I say it's harder, but I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but I think it's harder to retroactively start including people with disabilities, at least from the general membership, might be a little confused just because people are uneducated and uninformed. So if someone with autism starts coming into the gym and they're scripting or they have some sort of stereotypy that people aren't accustomed to, and they might be like, wait, what's going on here? So like you said, the culture of acceptance, the ethos of inclusion being like a pillar of a facility, I think is essential. But
Well, and I think too, and it's been the theme of probably this conversation, but I'm wearing, for those that are listening, I'm wearing a Paralympics hat right now. And I think it's just like, it highlights to your point that like, it doesn't have to be the same for everyone, right? Like,
yeah,
and Paralympics exists for a reason, because like the Olympics doesn't work for everyone. That's obviously, I'm speaking at the elite level, but I think that idea applies all the way down through everything. And so to your point about the ethos and feeling included, yeah, I think it's really important. And I think we need to get out of the mindset that like, square peg round hole, like take said individual with disability and plant them in this model and then adapt from there, or can you build things out that are with everyone in mind, right?
what are you working on that you're most excited about in the coming months or the coming years?
I just finished a book chapter with Justin Hagel, which was about my
Nice.
experiences in physical education as a individual with a disability. So that was pretty cool. Some of the stuff I'm actually most excited about isn't tied to adaptive physical education. I'm on the board of directors at U.S. Soccer, and so some of the stuff I'm most excited about is um, the continued growth of disability soccer in this country and at the elite level, which again I know impacts a smaller percentage of the population, but just being on the board and being a voice for US, for those at the table, to continually open their eyes about how can they be investing and in funding, and how can they continue to grow. So for instance, we just announced yesterday that we had a $30 million donation, which is huge. And the intent of it is to grow women's soccer, which is
Oh,
great.
I saw
So,
that. Yeah. Yeah.
certainly a great endeavor. No, no questions asked. But my first question to some people on the inside was like, "Hey, did you have a conversation with this person that like it could go towards women with disabilities? Because we do field a women's CP team, and women's deaf team, and power soccer is actually gender. It's both genders, but we do field their national team, and so we have these multiple pathways for individuals with disabilities at the elite level. And so my first question was like, hey, of 30 million, did you even have a conversation about 500 grand to a million? Because that sure goes a long way in our space. And so those are the things I'm really excited about. And if you look, my team was the only team U.S. Soccer had at one time, and now we're up to, um, well, I mean, 7 or 8 disability teams. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. So, I mean, we've grown. And so just continuing to shine light on it and getting people to recognize that when they come to the table, like, hey, I jokingly call us the oh by the way. It's like, oh by the way, we have these programs, but like don't forget about us. Like bring us together. I'm not saying it has to be the $30 million donation for them, but like, hey, yeah, this is great. We're sitting down with you. You're going to give us a lot of money. We're so grateful. Just so you know, we are going to take a percentage of it to fund these other programs we're passionate about because we believe in them and we believe in providing pathways.
Yeah, I would imagine that donor would want to see their money go the furthest way possible and benefit the most people possible. So I can't imagine she wouldn't want it to be allocated in some way to the disabled pathways.
That's
Is
the hope.
is amputee soccer within the U.S. soccer framework?
So yes and no. They are within the framework in that they are a member of U.S. Soccer. U.S. Soccer at this time, and this is not to say they wouldn't. There's a process to undergo, but U.S. Soccer would does not currently run their men's or women's national teams. So a lot of times what's happened in disability sport through the years is that you had to have passionate volunteers that were like, hey, we're going to do this. And so they create a governing body for said disability group, right? And we're evolving though, and you can see all the ones coming into U.S. Soccer. So it's through an application process, and so we'll see if and that would require amputee soccer essentially ceding control of their national teams and saying, all right, yeah, you go run them. We're out of it. We'll do some other maybe grassroots stuff. But so ultimately, that's a decision for them to try to make. But it's certainly a possibility that if they wanted U.S. Soccer to actually run their national, but again, they are members. They do come to our annual general meeting. They do vote at our annual general meeting. They're members in that sense. It's just we're not actually governing their national teams at this point in time.
Yeah, we've had Nico on the show, and then also had Alexia. Machete, who just was goalkeeper of the year at the Worlds earlier this month. So 2 people that are doing great things for the sport. So hopefully that continues to grow, whether it becomes a part of U.S. Soccer or not. Nico's put a lot of time into trying to grow chapters and local grassroots programs. So I think the culmination of a lot of different things and a lot of people's effort into growing these things will hopefully go a long way to making them more well-recognized and well-funded. But Chris, pleasure to talk to you. These are topics that are really important to me. I think they have broad applicability, not just in the education space or not just in the fitness space, but across all industries. So whether you're an employer seeking to find ways to make your employees feel more included, or you're a coach hoping that your athletes will become, grow in their feelings of inclusion and the success they feel when participating in sports. I think these conversations are important. So I appreciate you having it with me.
Hi, it was a lot of fun. I could talk all day. So
yeah, likewise. Thank you for listening to the AdaptX podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.